Hey fellow tankers, it's Mobius Y here once again, and welcome to the 4th episode of Mediums Forever. Mediums Forever is a short 5-episode series where I cover an extensive review of each of the medium tanks down the Russian Object 430 medium tank line. And here with episode 4, we are covering the Tier 9 Object 430 version 2. And for short, I typically call it the 430 Type 2. It's just quicker that way. Anyways, Mediums Forever, the difference between this kind of line series over my previous grinding series is with Mediums Forever, I have been using some of that 2 million free XP I used to have and just playing every tank fully upgraded and doing an extensive review of the most played edition of the tank that you will come across if you find yourself going down this line. So here with episode 4, the Tier 9 Object 430 version 2. This was a very interesting tank to play, quite a fun tank to play. So to start off though, I will say that initially I started to struggle with this tank, actually. I don't know what the heck was wrong with me, but for the first 60 games or so, about the first third of the games that I played in this tank, I believe. I think I have a total of about 180 games in this, before I had enough XP for the Object 430 to research the Object 430 at Tier 10. My first third of my games or so, I really seemed to struggle. I had very inconsistent games, ranging from doing very little to no damage to having a ridiculous game where I do over 5,000 damage or something crazy like that. You know, something just crap that's very uncommon to my kind of gameplay, essentially. I don't know what the deal was, and then eventually something kind of just clicked with me where I had much more consistent games where I was getting at least over 2,000 points worth of damage with this tank, which was a pretty pleasing average, and it was, like I said, it was much more consistent than when I first started playing this tank. I don't know what the deal was. It was strictly me. It's definitely not the tank, because this tank is pretty freaking awesome. Honestly, if you like the T-54 and you want to really try something different in a Russian medium tank at Tier 9, a very effective Russian medium tank at Tier 9, definitely go down this line just to try out the Object 430 Type 2. This tank was oodles of fun. I had a lot of enjoyment from it, and a lot of aspects of it play very similarly to the T-54, because the Object the 430 Type 2, it gets the same gun, the same final gun that you get on the Object 416, which is essentially borderline identical to the T-54's D10 T2C 100mm gun. I believe on the 416 and the 430 Type 2, it is the M68 100mm, something like that. Anyways, the semantics don't matter. But why I say it's very similar to the T-54, this tank has pretty dang good damage per minute values, DPM, due to the gun performing very, very similarly. Like I said, pretty much identical. This tank also has extremely good mobility, really good traverse rates, great top speed, great acceleration, good view range, and the big outstanding aspect of this tank is it has pretty damn good armor. I believe the turret armor itself is actually better than the T-54's in the face of the Object 430 Type 2 because it is simply thicker plating on the front of the turret. But not only that, the hull itself is really well armored as well on the 430 Type 2. Not only are some of the plates quite thick, some of the very well sloped plates are quite thick, but there's also some very interesting angles on some of the front plating, creating automatic ricochet zones, where if a tank is facing you and shoots you flat in that area, directly from the front, it will automatically ricochet because the angle is simply too sharp to even possibly penetrate. And it's really cool about that. And also, so that's essentially the armor from the front, but the armor also from the side is really, really good for side scraping. This thing's hull armor is 80 millimeters thick on the sides above the tracks. That is really good for side scraping, especially if you abuse this rear-mounted turret that the Object 430 Type 2 has, along with the A44 and the Object 416. I mentioned in the previous episodes of Mediums Forever the Object 416, the A44 was pretty adept at side scraping. It had not the most accurate gun, but it had pretty good pen for its tier, and it was quite bloody powerful for a tier 7 medium tank. The Object 416, you could side scrape in it, but it's not quite as effective. It's got pretty weak hull armor compared to, even the A44 of its tier. If you recall, the Object 416, it has some decent turret armor, but mostly in the top half of the turret itself. Not really in the hull. However, when you step up to the Object 430 Type 2, or version 2, you realize that this thing's hull and turret armor are a massive improvement over the Object 416. So kind of like bumping up from the A44 to the Object 416, the 430 Type 2 improves on several aspects of the 416 that you can utilize, to the point where you can absolutely abuse them in the Object 430 version 2, as well as some of its quirks kind of stick around, and it even improves on a couple of the aspects of the Object 416 that make it feel really weird at first. The game's going to speed up at this point. This was my first game with the Object 430 version 2. Not a bad game whatsoever. I wound up taking practically no damage this game, so I had a very positive damage ratio in this first game. But I'm going to be doing nothing else for the rest of this game, so we'll just speed through it really quickly. So, like I said, rear-mounted turret combined with pretty dang good frontal hull armor, plus really good side armor, and a nice accurate gun. This thing is quite good for side scraping. A couple downsides of the tank. Again, you have very low gun depression. I believe I said previously that you have 3 degrees. That was incorrect. You have 4 degrees of gun depression. So you get a 33.3% improvement over the Object 416 with gun depression. What else was there? The penetration is the same as the Object 416. So you'll find yourself slinging a lot more heat rounds at Tier 9 than at Tier 8. So this tank can cost you silver. So you can see at the end of this first game here, 2550 damage dealt with 2 tanks knocked out. Pretty good base experience, 1304 for my first game in the Object 430 version 2. Not a bad game at all. Definitely set the bar fairly high in terms of how I felt this tank was going to perform. So, on top of, like I said, low gun depression, and the turret doesn't traverse all the way around just like the Object 416, but it does traverse more than the Object 416. You can aim full-on sideways, at 90 degrees sideways to the left or the right. Again, it's a rear-mounted turret, so it will feel really weird at first, but there are some major improvements in this tank over the Object 416 that can make this tank really perform extremely well for you if you put it in the right situations. It's not a hill fighter, not by a long shot, but it can flank. It's not a very good sniper. It doesn't have great accuracy, 0.37 accuracy. It can do it if you need to in a pinch. But it's a pretty good side-scraping brawler. It can deflect a lot of Tier 9 and Tier 10 shells fired your way if you're side-scraping just right. So we're going to open up the tech tree here. Let's take a look at the packages on the 430 version 2, get an idea of how the grind is. So like I said, the Object 430 version 2 uses this final 100mm M63 gun that you get with the final package of the Object 416. So the gun is already pre-researched from the previous tank, And not only that, but the 100mm M63 is used right off the bat. This is the gun that you are using on the tank, completely stock, and it is on the second package, the M1951 package. The second package here, which gives you enhanced treads and the turret upgrade over the first package. And the final package, the Object 432-100D, still uses that same 100mm M63, but you still get an engine upgrade as well to help increase your mobility. So all sorts of upgrades all around with going up this tank itself. Now this other package here is the 100mm T-54 gun, which is also the alternate gun on the T-54. And like on the T-54, it performs exactly the same. You have 7.5 rounds per minute, so a slightly higher rate of fire than on the T-54. But you still got the same 219 penetration, 320 average alpha damage. The aim time is 2.9, which isn't that great for a medium tank, and the accuracy is 0.37, which is identical to the M63. So the 100mm M63 is a little bit less accurate than the T-54's D10 T2C, if I remember correctly, but it does fire about the same speed. You've got 7.89 rounds per minute, 201 average AP penetration, 330 heat penetration, 320 average alpha damage on both those shell types, 50 penetration with their high explosive shells at 420 average alpha damage, aiming time 2.29 and accuracy 0.36. So almost identical statistics from the Object 416. A couple differences here and there, but they're very, very subtle. 0.36 accuracy, that while not terrible, it's, like I said, not that great for sniping, but you can do it if you need to in a little pinch. But like I said, because of this tank's good frontal and very good side armor, you can really make this tank sing for you when you get up close near the front lines or on the front lines with some proper support and get into a good side scraping position. Other mobility features, the 430 version 2, 48 degrees track traverse per second. The turret armor, like I said, is very good, 248 millimeters at the thickest on the front. You've got a 390 meter view range, and I believe it was about a 46 degrees per second turret traverse on this tank. So let's take a look at the supplies and the equipment that I used on this tank. With this, like I said, you're going to wind up shooting a lot more heat rounds than on the Object 416, simply because you're constantly facing Tier 9, so you're going to face a lot of VK-45 Bravos, E-75s, Yog Tigers, STIs, Russian heavies, even sometimes IS-8s can give you some trouble. So you're going to sling more heat rounds. You're going to have to sling more heat rounds to be successful in this tank. Yes, it will cost more silver, but the rewards will pay off themselves. I only carried 3 high explosive rounds, as I didn't feel the need for more. For consumables, I started using the large repair kit and large first aid kit as opposed to the small variants on the Object 416. This was a little more costly and did make me tank in silver on some games, but I was able to earn all or most of it back with 1 or 2 good games in this tank. And of course, an automatic fire extinguisher to put out fires instantaneously when they happen, but also reduce the chance of them happening right off the bat, because once again, this tank has fuel tanks and the engine deck in the very front. For equipment, again, very basic medium tank setup. Coated optics for the first piece of equipment to increase my view range. Medium caliber tank gun rammer to help with the DPM. And vertical stabilizer to help with the overall accuracy. Again, vertical stabilizer is 100% a better choice than enhanced gun lane drive. And with 2.29 aim time on this tank, you don't really need an enhanced gun lane drive because 2.29 is a very good average. So let's go to tanks.gg, take a look at the armor model in depth. Right off the bat, you can see, like I said, the turret face is quite well protected. You have plating of 248 millimeters thick, and these are the flattest pieces of armor on the turret. You've got well-sloped 210 millimeter plates in the center of the turret, and the weakest pieces are 185 millimeters, very well-sloped on the front of the turret as well. The front of the hull itself, only 120 millimeter plating, 120 millimeters thick, but it's sloped quite well to give you some sharp angle values. Now this top piece here that's flashing, only 60 millimeters, but it's essentially an auto bounce zone because of the sharp angle there. It's over 70 degrees sloped. The rest of the front of the hull, you're getting just under 200 millimeters due to the sloping of it. Very, very decent frontal hull plating. When completely flat onto this tank, it's very effective. The flat pieces of the tank, as you get near the lower plate, starts to get quite a bit weaker, especially facing this tank dead on. The lower plate itself is only about 160, but it's a lot harder to pen it when you are aiming downwards at this tank since it is so low. Like I said, this top piece here, it's angled so well, it's essentially an auto bounce, unless you have a very tall tank shooting downwards at you. Now let's get into the side armor, and what makes this tank so good for the side scraping. Not only the combination of the good frontal hull armor here with the really good frontal turret showing off the 274 millimeters at the flattest pieces. You're getting some values up to about 400 here in the turret here. Some sides of the turret, they're dropping as low as 231. There seems to be an odd little shot trap right about there. Just around there's a machine gun port right in this area. That's about the weakest value you'll get on the front of this turret is about 230 millimeters. Same story on the other side without the machine gun port though, and you're still looking at over 220, 230 millimeters all around most of the turret. The hatches themselves, quite strong. You're getting 200 millimeters minimum at the very least on both hatches, but you will still get some really accurate shots from high-pen guns that will still damage this, but for the most part, you will get some seriously troll bounces off of these. Excuse me. So the turret face is quite well protected there. The weak spots on the turret, not essentially the hatches, but the top of the turret right above the gun mantlet. You can see here 63 millimeters thick and 30 millimeters thick at the top of the turret. It's very weak. I don't know what's going on there with that pop-up. Very weak in the top of the turret, and even with the sloping, it's only 65 millimeters thick, so that's a very vulnerable weak point. Not very well angled here either. This piece right above the gun mantlet, it says it's an auto bounce, but most tanks are taller than you, so as they're shooting down, they lose the auto bounce angle, and that is a very easy place to penetrate the 430 Type 2. Right above the gun mantlet, as well as the essentially the turret roof itself. And this auto bounce zone here on the hull does not become an auto bounce anymore, and is also very, very weak and easy to pen for tall tanks. So back to the side armor there. Sorry, kind of jumped the gun. 80 millimeters on the side, going up to 100 millimeters with the spaced armor from the tracks as well. But the lower areas of the hull, 57 millimeters thick, jumping up to 77 millimeters with the spaced armor offered from the tracks. Really good armor for side scraping. The turret side itself, you got some 130 millimeter plates, jumping up to about 150, 160 effective armor, right in the middle of the turret, but still not very thick, easy to damage. The back of the turret itself, again, very weak, as you would expect, 65, 70 millimeters. And the back of the hull in the 430 Type 2, if you get a 430 Type 2, if you get behind one, shoot it there, right in the hull, 40 millimeters thick. So, essentially in the 430 Type 2, if you're playing it, you want to be, like I said, you want to be side scraping as much as you can if you're on the front lines. Turning your turret about 16 degrees, right about there, is how you want to look. That makes most of this side armor an auto bounce, as well as quite thick and very difficult for a lot of lower pen guns to penetrate. Your front plate is still pretty strong as well, and this auto bounce zone is still an auto bounce zone. So essentially, with your gun, just your gun poking out, very little of your front plate exposed, it's very difficult to penetrate this tank without at least 230 millimeters penetration. Looking at the live cam here, you can see right from the front there's a nice auto bounce zone at the very top of the hull. Very thick plating in the front of the turret there. And as you come around, that side just gets weaker and weaker. It's only 80 millimeters, not great when facing it dead on, and it's really flat, but it's more than effective. Excuse me, it's more than effective to put yourself in a side scraping position with this tank. You want to, like I said, you want to put your turret about 16 degrees off to one side, making most of your side armor an auto bounce zone, like so. Nothing but ricochets all along here, as well as ricochets on this top plate, and a very tough 200 plus millimeter effective armor on the front plate of the 430 Type 2. Let's take a look at the details here, the simple details. Now keep in mind that tanks.gg, it still uses PC values for the tanks, so things like DPM, seconds to reload, can be quite different from what you'll actually experience or see on the Xbox version of World of Tanks. So let's go ahead and compare the 430 Type 2 with the Object 416. At first, you should have pretty much the same DPM as you're using the same gun from the previous tank. So it should be the same DPM, but you are getting 10 meters extra view range over the Object 416 from the previous tier. You're getting an extra 500 hit points for a total of 1,700. And you have a slightly better forward top speed, although your power to weight ratio is just a little bit less than the Object 416. and your traverse speeds are definitely lower than the Object 416. Gun constraints. Like I said, 4 degrees of gun depression all the way around, but you can point your turret 90 degrees to the side, making it easier for drive-bys and circling enemy tanks than the Object 416. And only about, I believe it was about 15 degrees gun elevation. The dispersion values when moving and traversing the tank itself, they're a bit worse than the Object 416, but everything else is on par, as well as the soft stats for terrain resistances, pretty much on par with the Object 416, so the mobility of this tank should for the most part feel quite similar. Let's go ahead and compare this now with the T-54. Those of you who have played the T-54, this tank will feel different and similar in some ways. You should have a very similar DPM, slightly more health at 50 hit points more health than the T-54, the other Russian Tier 9, and a bit worse hull armor in the rear of the tank, although your turret armor is definitely rated much better on the Object 430 version 2 compared to the T-54. Excuse me. Obviously, the gun depression and gun constraints are worse than the T-54 without a fully rotating turret, although your soft stats like terrain resistances are in fact better than on the T-54 in terms of overall mobility. So that's pretty handy to know. So that's basically a look at the armor model as well as some of the more detailed statistics of the 430 Type 2. Let's take a look at the module and crew locations. So like I said, from the front, from the previous two tanks, again, engine deck, engine deck, engine deck, all over the front of the tank there. Definitely want to train your crew on preventative maintenance by this point, or throw on an automatic fire extinguisher at all times. And you can see on the sides of the turret, in the lower areas where the plating starts to get weak, your driver is actually on the right side of the turret there, so he has the potential to get knocked out if somebody gets a side shot on your turret there. Looking at it at a higher angle, just a little bit from the left, you can see that while the hatches are indeed weak points, I did point out that they are fairly difficult to pen. If you have a low penetration gun, you need at least a good 220, 230 millimeters of penetration to reliably pen this thing 3 out of 4 times, essentially. The turret ring on the front is considered a weak point. It is very, very, very small to hit, especially from the front, though. Not a reliable weak point to aim for. Looking at the left side of the tank, you can start to see at the very rear of the tank, there's a bit of a white zone there, which indicates ammo rack. That's very vulnerable. You can see I believe that's the commander in the back of the turret, underneath the hatch on the left side of the turret. And your engine deck can still get shot out from your sides there if somebody is shooting at a flat angle towards your 80 millimeters of side armor there. So very vulnerable to get module damage in those areas. So at the back of the turret, you can see the commander sits in the hatch on the left, the loader sits in the hatch on the right. And the main reason why I said if you get behind a 430 Type 2, if you literally get behind him, shoot him in the hull, because not only is it a whopping 45 millimeters effective armor, but that is all ammo rack back there. This tank is very easy to ammo rack if you get shots into the rear drive wheel or just into the back of the hull of this tank. You can severely cripple its potential, knocking out its DPM and just making it much less effective overall. Looking a bit from the left of the tank, the right side of the tank from the rear, you can see, like I said, the driver sitting up at the front, underneath the hatch at the front of the turret. The loader sits just behind him, with the commander on the opposite side of the turret from the loader. And you can still see lots of area for ammo rackage at the back of this tank. Excuse me. And as I said, essentially hitting this rear drive wheel that you see on the left side of the picture right now, the little green circle. Shooting that area of this tank, if you have a good shot there, that will actually cause ammo rackage sometimes. So be sure to shoot there if you have the chance to against a 430 Type 2. Also be sure to protect it if you are in a 430 Type 2, especially when you're side scraping. And you can see on the right side, just behind the engine deck, is all sorts of fuel tanks. So you definitely want to make sure you have an automatic fire extinguisher on here. So again, this tank, it's definitely a little bit quirky. Still keeps some of the interesting odds and ends that have been picked up since the A44. Low gun depression, rear-mounted turret. From the Object 416, you still got a limited turret traverse, although it's not as bad. It can rotate all the way left or right. And you still got that really good DPM from the Object 416, but at Tier 9, the gun itself kind of has some low pen, so you're going to want to shoot some more heat rounds with it. That's why I carried 17 as opposed to just a few. Now, if you really just don't really perform well in this tank, you can have a really bad time. Barely, not even going positive in damage, hardly getting any XP, and even losing quite a bit of silver from shooting heat rounds. So on a win such as this, I shot quite a bit of heat rounds, but I only had 3 penetrating shots, and I lost quite a bit of silver there because I hardly did any damage this game, and it wound up costing me big time, getting destroyed quite early before I could make a significant difference in this particular game here. Sometimes you'll be playing, and your game will just freeze partway through, and then you know you're in for a crappy game because there's just nothing you can do about it. Sometimes you'll just come across somebody in a mouse who decides to face hug you, and again, there's not much you can do about it but shoot a heat round into his front plate. And there's other times where you'll be playing a game and you will lose control of the tank because you completely lag out, can't shoot your gun, can't reverse to get back into cover. You're essentially a sitting duck for the entire enemy team, and looking like a complete fool. So, laugh at my pain on those 3 games there. But even if you do even decently well in this tank, I shot a fair bit of heat rounds in this game, gained about 10,000 silver, doing a little over 2,000 damage. Even on a loss, I still gained a bit of silver and had an okay XP haul that game. It wasn't too bad. In a game like that. But as always, you don't want to rely on the 330 pen heat rounds. They're not 100% reliable, as they do not get normalization like standard armor piercing or APCR rounds, as well as, they're just expensive. You don't need to fling them at everything. Excuse me. So let's jump into some gameplay here. We're here on a standard battle in Malinovka. This game here, I was only platooned with one other buddy of mine. I believe this is me partnered up with Grizzly 22, who was also grinding a fair bit of this tank. Oh, sorry, I lied. This is with Joe the Frogman in the Lorraine 40-ton. We were just kind of back and forthing, BSing, since it was just the 2 of us. And we're in a very, very top tier game here. There's only 5 tier 9s on both teams, and the rest are about 4 or 5 tier 8s, and the rest are 7s. So with essentially about 2/3 of both teams lower tier than us, I totally expected that I'd be able to bully lower tier tanks, utilizing this tank's extremely impressive hull and turret armor for a medium tank, as well as its more than adequate penetration for tier 8 and definitely tier 7 tanks. You should by playing this Object 416, you realize that I believe what was it, the M68? I can't remember what the heck it was. The M68 100mm gun, whatever it was, is almost outperforming at tier 8. It's a ridiculous gun to get at tier 8, and that's why the Object 416 is such a ridiculous tank. So when you wind up in a game such as this, where you are very, very top tier, it should be almost easy just to farm a bunch of damage, especially if you wind up on the front lines facing off against lower tier tanks. You can just pick on them, get off multiple really quick shots, about 7 or 8 quick damaging shots off, and you'll find you've already racked up 2,000 plus damage just from doing that. By looking at the map, me and Joe are completely alone here. We've got half of our heavies still back at the spawn, so I was trying to signal this bottom tier Tiger to fall back, as this is just not going to go very well. And naturally we came across a top tier E75 at the top of the hill. So the situation's looking pretty grim right about now, and I'm just trying to stay a little mobile to avoid getting hit by artillery. Trying to see if we can get some momentum going for our team to kick things off here. Excuse me. So this game here, I'm not really in the greatest position to utilize something with fairly low gun depression, especially 4 degrees, like the Object 430 version 2. But I was actually able to position myself decently enough where I could make it just barely work. And things will definitely pick up a little bit later on here when I'm in a much stronger position, much more usable position for these 4 degrees of gun depression here. Right now, there's mostly just a lot of maneuvering, trying to get some pot shots on this E50, but I couldn't quite tell if I would have a well enough shot into his side armor from this angle. So the T-54 E1 must have reloaded, as he's looking back at me. So I'm trying to put a nice accurate shot into a damaging piece of the turret hatch there, but it doesn't. I'm not really sure where I'm aiming at, to be totally honest at this point. So that shot there was just a really, really poorly aimed shot, as I thought he was still sitting behind the fence, and the shell would go through and actually hit him. But such was not the case. So I got my head out of my ass and actually aimed at a part where I could damage him, getting a nice damaging hit on him for 232. And seeing the E50 starting to bully Joe the Frogman, I decided to pull in front of him, start taking hits for him, and just put shells in this E50. After I tracked him, I was able to get one shot into his lower plate, getting another shot into his side armor and making him completely one shot. And this would have been a good time for him to back off altogether, but he decided to pull forward, try and get a shot on me, which bounced due to me side-scraping behind the windmill, allowing me to completely finish him off. So at this point, it's my time to fall back just a little bit. I see there's a heavy right behind me who can cause some severe problems for my teammates in the back there. I figure I've got some support, so I can be in a kind of forward position, even against a top-tier M103 that is fully upgraded. And upon detecting him, the T-54E1 decides to come back. Was about to cause me problems, but due to my well-positioned friendly and the AT-7, he was able to get a nice shot on him and take that T-54E1 out for me once and for all. Now, I know this M103 is fully upgraded because he's got a machine gun on the top of his turret. I did grind that tank myself, and without the machine gun, that's an indication that the M103 has the stock turret. But when it's fully upgraded, it's got the machine gun on top, so I know that the usual hatch sitting in the very back on top of the turret is not a usual weak point I can aim for now, as it's actually much better armored on the upgraded turret over the stock one. So I get a lucky shot into the top of the turret on the M103, which is still very weak, like the stock turret. And I see a Black Prince and an A44 just barreling down towards me. The Black Prince is trying to get shots. I don't know what this A44 is doing, so I just got in his way and made him ram me, causing him to track himself. Unfortunately, the M103 starts going ham on my teammates, but I have bigger problems with this A44 looking at me. And he doesn't seem to be fully upgraded, as he's actually shooting quite quickly, so I assumed he had the 76mm S54, so I knew he had no chance of penetrating me from the front. Keeping my front angle towards him, bouncing all of his shots, allowing me to quickly take him out so that I could focus my attention on this Black Prince up top, who is insistent on trying to take chunks out of my armor. Trying to get a shot into the side of the Black Prince, the shot just goes a little bit wide of the turret, but it doesn't really matter as the M12 is able to whack it. My artillery did a very good job this game. They were on point, landing some very important shots when I needed them to. And this tank was able to perform quite well for me. I was able to cause some majorly troll bounces, just like what happened there with the M103. So seeing the VK-45 Bravo, I decided to load some heat rounds. I thought I'd still have to deal with that M103, but he gets taken out by artillery again. Had a great supporting game by artillery this game. And with the VK-45 Bravo facing me, even though he's got the stock turret, I know that I'm going to have trouble penning him, even in his weak points. So I loaded up heat rounds and just started slinging the heat, shooting it in, aiming for their turret hatches at the top of the turret, which actually, it's actually fairly well protected. It's much more difficult to pen with the standard AP of this gun at a whopping 201 millimeters of pen. But the 330 millimeters of pen with the heat rounds just cuts right through it, turns it into a normal weak point, just like most other tanks in the game, making it an easy pen, easy damaging hits. So again, artillery strikes once more. This is the third heavy tank that they've taken out for me while I'm simply spotting for them. And that leaves this last VK-45 Bravo. I basically just got his teammate killed, so this last VK-45 Bravo, I'm just trying to position and get some nice shots into his weaker armor. Since he's above me, I'm able to actually angle my shots upward into his lower plate, which puts it at a much flatter angle, allowing all three shots with standard AP to just go right in and damage him, taking him out fairly quickly before he was able to severely damage me. Thankfully, both those VK-45 Bravos, they were platooned, but they just weren't able to coordinate together well enough with the artillery support that I had from my teammates this game. allowing me to take them both out. So essentially, I magically stopped the brunt of the assault from this enemy team, racking up a fair bit of damage myself. I did shoot a lot of heat rounds, as I knew that the VK-45 Bravo, and especially the fully upgraded M103, they're fairly tough nuts to crack when they're doing their jobs just right. So I did wind up shooting quite a bit of heat rounds this game, trying to chase down this Object 416, but my sniping shot is just going to miss. Seems to go just low, and then the other friendly in another Object 430 Type 2 manages to finish him off. This was actually one of my first 40 games or so. This was the game that I was talking about, where it was a very inconsistent high damage game. 5,077 damage dealt, 3,781 assisted damage, netting me a patrol duty medal along with the high caliber, and 2,350 damage blocked. Very, very well-deserved mastery badge on this game. 2181 base XP earned, thanks to netting 2 medals that game, both the patrol duty and the high caliber. Absolutely ridiculous game. That was the best game I had in the first third of the games that I had in this tank. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of consistency. I wasn't trying to have a 5,000 damage game all the time. This guy kind of just magically pulled out of my butt. Definitely shooting some heat rounds really helped. But I had a lot more crappy games, like I said, in my first third or so of the games I played in this tank. But that game just seemed to work out quite well for me. I did wind up using the 430 Type 2 to its strengths as best as I could, with a little bit extra wiggling and making sure that my front is towards those VKs, slightly angled, and the M103 slightly angled. I did cause quite a few lucky bounces with the armor there, netting over 2,300 damage blocked, allowing me to just keep shooting rounds back at my opponents and rack up a crap load of damage that game. This third game here on Wide Park, you're actually not going to be paying attention to me because this is one of those crappy games that I was going to talk about. But this is a game where I am platooned with my buddy Grizzly22, who was also grinding the Object 430 version 2. So we actually were able to platoon up for quite a few games, and I recorded quite a lot of them. We had some good times together. We were able to work these two tanks very well together and had a good old time doing it. Unfortunately, this was one of my really crappy games. You're going to see me do a little trick here that I picked up in the A44 here on Wide Park. We're going to go over to the bridge in the D2 area, and we're essentially going to double side scrape against one of the pillars, one of these support pillars underneath the bridge. Now, I'm actually going to do it wrong this game, as I'm going to, well, you'll basically tell because I'm going to get blown the F up pretty quickly here. But Grizzly had never done this before, and I said, hey, you want to do something stupid this game? And I was able to convince him to do it with me, right next to me, underneath the same bridge, about a pillar or two beside me. And you'll actually watch how much his tracks soak up damage, as well as his armor, his side armor in particular, and his turret armor bounce shells. So as soon as the game starts, we turn right over here, and we move into position. And essentially, what Grizzly does here is what we're going to do. We're just going to throw our noses right up to these pillars, and we're barely going to move. This is not something I recommend if you plan to actually survive a game, have a good game, get a lot of damage, and move around a lot, because once you're in this kind of a position, you're not going anywhere for the rest of the game. T-34 tracked me, so I responded in kind with 2 accurate shots into his side armor, getting a nice 2 good hits there. So I kept picking on him, trying to knock him out really early, knocking him down to 1 shot. So he's pretty badly hurt. Now, as soon as this 215B and this Leopard Proto whacked me, I should have realized I'm doing something wrong because I'm taking a significant amount of damage. And then the T-30 sniping at the back manages to finish me off. You can see there I'm not angled right. My right side is sticking out on the right side of the pillar, allowing them easy damaging shots on my front hull. So I was essentially doing that very wrong. However, I was able to coach Grizzly to get into this position right here. He's slightly angled so that he can poke out the left side and shoot at the tanks that he wants to target right now. But he's not doing it so much where the front of his hull is easy to target from either side of the pillar. I don't know how or why this works the way it does. I'm going to chalk it up to the width of this tank is basically just perfect. In terms of the tracks are wide enough to absorb a lot of hits. The tank itself is just wide enough where the tracks are poking out, allowing you to absorb a crap load of shots. And the armor on the front of this tank is good enough where really troll angling just like this will get you a lot of really cheap bounces. So you can see here Grizzly's he's just backing up just a tiny tad to get shots off, and he's getting tracked, just incessantly tracked by all these tanks sniping in the back at him. M103 tracks him one more time right after he shoots that M103 for another damaging hit. The M103 comes back out to take another shot. Grizzly tries to line it up here, looking for another damaging hit on that M103. He's sitting in a really good position. He's just keeping his tank angled just right so where enemies shooting at him on the right side of the pillar, they have nothing but his tracks to shoot at, which will absorb the hit. And on the left side, he's side-scraping just right where either his tracks will absorb the shot in his side armor, or the side armor will bounce it, or the turret itself will more than likely bounce it. A couple more shots into the M103, hiding in the building there. Manages to finish it off, giving Grizzly quite a bit of breathing room now that there's one less tank shooting back at him. So all in all, turning out to be a very good outcome for Grizzly 22 here this game. Me, like I said, I just did it wrong, and I didn't realize it until it was just too late for me to do anything about it. So with these late stages in the game, it's almost getting to the point where Grizzly's able to break out from this position and actually start assaulting the remaining enemies from their flanks. However, there's still a T-30 and a Waffle 4 in the back there that have just been waiting for the chance to shoot him for the whole game. So Grizzly repositions quite well, and he re-angles his tank this time to the point where he's actually angled a little bit to his left, where backing up will let him come out the right side of the pillar, essentially giving him a strong side-scraping position. Eating another shot in his tracks from the T-30 while he's trying to reposition there. That shot could very well have ended him, but as you can tell, he's angling just right to where his tracks will either absorb the shot or his side armor could have very well bounced the shot as well. Gets a nice accurate hit on that T-30, responding in kind to the T-30 constantly shooting at him the whole game here. And our teammates just start swooping in to do some mop up this game. So, like I said, this was a really crappy game for me. I got a whopping 3 damaging hits, but I really wanted to show this game as it was. It's just a very interesting thing that I found you could do with this tank. Even all the way back to the A44 I did this, but the A44 has much weaker frontal hull armor for its tier in comparison to the Object 430 version 2. Like I said, I do not recommend that trick, doing it 100% of the time. Do it if you want to try something really stupid, but do not expect to be able to move off of that position whatsoever, either because you're just going to get tracked incessantly where you can't move, or you're just going to die. It's one of those two. But when you're doing it right and it's working right, you can have a pretty good game like Grizzly 22 here did. 2352 damage dealt, but 4100 damage blocked. Probably the easiest steel wall metal you could possibly get in a tier 9 medium tank. That's just hilarious. 1251 assisted damage as well, netting him base XP of 1306 base XP. So a very interesting game there. Like I said, it wasn't me that you were watching. That was my buddy Grizzly 22. Really good player, great guy to platoon with. And I really wanted to showcase that kind of stupid positioning with the Object 432. But a game like that also indicates just how strong of a side-scraping tank this thing is. Its tracks can absorb a lot of hits. Its frontal turret armor, and it's really well. And if you have it really well angled, its side armor can bounce a lot of shots for you. I mean, 4100 damage block. That's something that you would see in things like an E100 or a mouse, even, especially in tier 9 or tier 10 game, essentially, or even an E75. Anyways, moving on. This last game I wanted to show you here. I believe this was my last game in the 430 Type 2, I think, or my second last. One of the two. I don't really remember which. One of the two of them was just a really quick 2-minute early base cap by my team, so it was just a really stupidly crappy game. So I didn't feel like sharing it. That might have actually been my last game, as I only needed a couple hundred XP, but that put me over the edge for researching the Object 430s. This game was much more interesting as a kind of final game in the 430 version 2. Really well-performing game. Once again, we are fairly top tier in this game. Able to get into this forward position really early and already get faced off against an enemy E50. A delicious bounce off the E50's lower plate, as it was just angled really well. You'll find even that kind of thing is fairly common. Supposedly weak lower plates will still ricochet this gun's shots, as, like I said, 201 pen, really not that great for tier 9. You can still definitely make it work, especially utilizing medium tank tactics, such as these kind of flanking maneuvers, getting lots of side and rear shots in your opponents, just in their vulnerable areas where you're pretty much guaranteed, or negating the possibility of a bounce. Odd shot into that Conqueror, not sure where it went, seems to have gone right through him, doesn't really matter. I'm trying to side scrape off the back of this E50 in case he decides to shoot me. Get one more shot on him, dropping him down to one shot, and that's when a friendly teammate finishes him off. As I'm moving into position here, I'm able to get a shot into this turret side of the E75, not even using a heat round, but seeing as there's two E75s right in front of me, I decided to load up some heat rounds and just start shooting at their weak points, like their lower plates and their hatches, as I know that my AP rounds are going to have either little or no chance to penetrate those exact same weak points. Excuse me. An enemy Super Persian comes up to assist the E75s as well, with a T-25-2 Tier 7 tank destroyer in the back. None of my shots are landing. I've already shot 4 heat rounds, and I don't think I've even hit a frickin' tank until I finally decide to just shoot an E-75 right in the turret face. Very flat piece of armor there, and the 330 pen heat rounds just cuts right through it. I'm trying to avoid shooting the Super Pershing with all its spaced armor, as I know it will pretty much negate the effect of a heat round. Trying to put shots in the C-75 and get rid of that huge health pool and large amount of armor, and kind of get our group here moving. Super Pershing is on such low health, I decided to just go for the ram. I did wind up damaging myself quite a bit, but I was able to finish off his last, so I believe it was about 60 hit points there. Gaining a lot of momentum going downhill, and just smacking him dead on, finishing off his last little bit of hit points. Without having to put a shell into him, I was able to immediately lock onto the T-25-2 and start putting rounds in him. My platoon mate, Double O Vend, looks like he's in a lot of trouble with 2 Tier 8 medium tanks ganging up on him. So I take out the T-69 first. I ram into the T-95 E2 to draw his attention away from Double O Vend, as he was on his backside, and Double O Vend was very hurt. Taking them both out quickly from the game. And with friendly help from a teammate, we were able to knock them out before they took out Double O Vend. Turning back to their base, there's an AFK T-71. So I just farm a bit of free damage on him right after I put one really lucky shot into the T-95. T-95s are a very tough egg to crack with this kind of a gun. So I try to keep my friendly in the scout behind the T-95, putting a nice tracking shot into that T-95, allowing all that magic in the AMX 1390 to finish it off with another shot into its rear armor. Pretty quick game there, a little less than 5 minutes, and like I said, even though I shot quite a bit of heat rounds that game, I still earned about 50,000 silver. It helps when you have some silver ops active to kind of mitigate that once you run out of doing the XP ops. Earned a Confederate medal that game, even though I destroyed 2 tanks, which means I shot 8 tanks total, detecting 6 tanks, dealing 3801 damage for a base XP of 1458. Not a bad game at all, especially to quote-unquote finish off grinding the 430 Type 2. So guys, like I said, this tank, it should feel a lot more familiar than the previous 2 tanks due to it having low gun depression, a rear-mounted turret, but you'll probably be a lot more comfortable with this one with its really good turret armor, very good side-scraping capabilities, a nice, accurate, high DPM gun, and obviously just a really well-performing machine altogether. So that was episode 4 of Mediums Forever. Thanks very much for watching. I hope to see you next time for the finale in episode 5. This is Mobius signing off. Have a wonderful night.